My name is Dr. Adrian Cole, and I'm a cardiac surgeon with 15 years of experience at Memorial Hospital. The irony of what happened wasn't lost on me. I spent my career saving hearts, but I couldn't protect my own father's when he needed me most. Dad suffered a massive stroke on a Wednesday morning while working in his garden. The ambulance rushed him to Clearwater Medical Center, the closest facility to his house. I arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing my surgical scrubs from an early morning procedure. The emergency department was chaos. I found Dad in examination room 4, his left side paralyzed, his speech slurred beyond recognition. The attending physician, Dr. Wallace Kumar, briefed me quickly. Ischemic stroke, left hemisphere. We've started tissue plasminogen activator, but the window is tight. He needs intensive monitoring for the next 72 hours. I want him transferred to Memorial, I said immediately. Wallace shook his head. Not advisable. He's stable now, but moving him risks complications. Our stroke unit is excellent. He'll get quality care here. I hesitated, torn between professional judgment and paternal instinct. Clearwater had a decent reputation. Moving Dad might cause more harm than good. Fine, I agreed, but I want daily updates. Any changes, you call me immediately. Dad was admitted to the intensive care unit within an hour. The nurse assigned to his care introduced herself as Brenda Winters, a woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and a perfunctory smile. Your father will be closely monitored, Brenda said, reading from a clipboard. We'll check vitals every 2 hours, administer medications on schedule, and conduct neurological assessments regularly. Something about her delivery felt mechanical, rehearsed. I noticed she hadn't made eye contact with Dad once during her introduction. What's your patient load today? I asked. Within acceptable standards, Brenda replied vaguely. Don't worry, Dr. Cole. We know what we're doing. I spent the first day at Dad's bedside, watching the monitors, noting every fluctuation in blood pressure and heart rate. Brenda appeared occasionally, checking boxes on her chart and adjusting IV lines with practiced efficiency. Around 7 that evening, my phone rang. Emergency surgery at Memorial required my immediate presence. A 62-year-old woman with an aortic dissection couldn't wait. I kissed Dad's forehead. I'll be back tomorrow morning. You're in good hands. He squeezed my hand weakly with his right side, the only movement he could manage. His eyes held fear I'd never seen before. I should have paid attention to that fear. The surgery lasted 6 hours. By the time I finished, it was past 2 in the morning. I grabbed 3 hours of sleep in the hospital's on-call room, then drove straight back to Clearwater at dawn. Something was wrong the moment I entered Dad's room. His complexion looked gray. The monitors showed blood pressure significantly lower than yesterday. His breathing seemed labored, each inhale requiring visible effort. What happened overnight? I demanded when Brenda appeared for the morning shift change. She glanced at the chart with barely concealed annoyance. Nothing unusual. Vitals have been stable. Stable? His blood pressure dropped 15 points. His oxygen saturation is down 3%. These numbers aren't stable. Brenda's jaw tightened. Minor fluctuations are normal with stroke patients, Dr. Cole. I'm sure you know that. I want to see the overnight nursing notes, all of them. I'll request them from records, she said curtly and left the room. I sat beside Dad, reviewing his chart myself. The documentation was sparse, almost suspiciously so. Vitals recorded every 4 hours instead of every 2 as promised. Medication administration times seemed irregular. Neurological assessment notes were identical across multiple entries, suggesting copy-paste rather than actual observation. My phone buzzed with a text from my colleague, Dr. Helena Brooks. How's your dad? I typed back, something feels off. Documentation looks sloppy. Her response came quickly. Trust your instincts. Document everything you see. I began keeping my own detailed log. Every time I visited, which was 3 to 4 times daily between my surgical schedule, I recorded Dad's condition with clinical precision. Blood pressure readings, oxygen levels, responsiveness, skin color, temperature, pupil reaction. Within 2 days, a pattern emerged. Dad's condition consistently declined during Brenda's shifts and stabilized during other nurses' rotations. On Friday evening, I arrived to find Dad's medication IV bag nearly empty. According to the chart, it should have been replaced an hour ago. I found Brenda at the nurses' station, chatting with 2 other staff members about weekend plans. My father's IV needs changing, I said, keeping my voice level. I'll get to it, Brenda replied without looking up. It's been overdue for 60 minutes. Dr. Cole, I have 6 patients. Your father isn't my only responsibility. No, but he's one of 6 people depending on you to do your job properly. Brenda stood abruptly. If you have complaints about my care, file them with my supervisor. Otherwise, please let me work without constant interference. Other nurses at the station looked uncomfortable. One younger woman, whose badge identified her as Pamela Chen. Wait, I couldn't use that name. Let me call her Pamela Foster. She met my eyes briefly, and something in her expression suggested sympathy. That night, I made a decision. I requested a meeting with the ICU director, a man named Vincent Shaw. He agreed to see me Saturday morning before my surgical schedule. Vincent's office was small and cluttered with medical journals and administrative binders. He listened politely as I outlined my concerns about Brenda's care. Dr. Cole, I understand you're worried about your father. That's natural. But Nurse Winters has been with us for 12 years. She's experienced and competent. Then why is documentation irregular? Why are medication schedules inconsistent? Why does my father's condition decline specifically during her shifts? Vincent opened a file on his computer. I'm looking at her recent performance reviews, all satisfactory. No complaints from other families. No disciplinary issues. Maybe other families don't have medical training to recognize substandard care. Vincent's expression hardened slightly. Dr. Cole, I respect your credentials, but this is my unit. I've reviewed your father's chart personally. The care meets our standards. Your standards allow medication delays and incomplete documentation? Minor variations occur in busy units. If Nurse Winters was genuinely negligent, other staff would have reported it. The fact that nobody has suggests your concerns might be influenced by emotional stress rather than objective observation. I stood to leave. With all due respect, Vincent, you're wrong, and I'm going to prove it. I left Vincent's office and went directly to the hospital's administration building. I needed to file a formal complaint, something that would trigger investigation beyond Vincent's protective oversight. The patient advocate's office was located on the 2nd floor. The woman behind the desk, whose nameplate read Cassandra Wells. No, I needed a different name. Let's say Cassandra Price. She greeted me with professional warmth. How can I help you today? I explained the situation methodically. The documentation irregularities, the medication delays, the pattern of decline during specific shifts, the dismissive response from the ICU director. Cassandra took notes carefully. Dr. Cole, these are serious allegations. To proceed with a formal investigation, we need specific evidence beyond your observations. Do you have documentation? I have my own logs comparing my father's condition to nursing notes. That's helpful, but not sufficient. We need proof of actual harm or clear policy violations. Without that, this becomes a he said, she said situation that's difficult to investigate fairly. So what you're saying is, I need to wait for something bad to happen before anyone takes this seriously. Cassandra's expression showed genuine sympathy. I'm saying we need concrete evidence. Continue documenting. If you observe actual negligence in real time, report it immediately. Call the charge nurse, call security, create a contemporaneous record. I thanked her and left, frustrated but understanding her position. The system required proof, and I hadn't yet gathered enough to compel action. Over the next week, I became obsessive about documentation. I purchased a small notebook and recorded every visit in detail. I photographed monitor screens with timestamps. I noted every interaction with Brenda, every delayed medication, every vague response to my questions. Dad's condition wasn't improving as expected. The neurologist, Dr. Felix Ramirez, seemed puzzled during his rounds. Stroke patients typically show some improvement by day 7. Your father's progress is slower than I'd anticipate, given the initial scan results. Could inadequate nursing care contribute to slower recovery? I asked directly. Felix chose his words carefully. Proper medication timing, consistent monitoring, and timely intervention for complications all affect outcomes. Why do you ask? I showed him my documentation. Felix reviewed my notes with growing concern. This is troubling. If these observations are accurate, there are significant care gaps. The ICU director dismissed my concerns. Felix closed my notebook and handed it back. Adrian, I can't get involved in nursing disputes, but I can adjust my rounds to coincide with times you've identified as problematic. If I observe issues firsthand, that's different from family complaints. It wasn't the aggressive support I wanted, but it was something. That afternoon, Felix conducted an unscheduled assessment during Brenda's shift. He questioned her about medication timing and documentation protocols. She provided practiced answers, but I noticed her discomfort. After Felix left, Brenda approached me. Your doctor friend doesn't intimidate me. I've been doing this job since before you finished medical school. The confrontation escalated the following day. I arrived at 10 in the morning to find Dad clearly in distress. His breathing was rapid and shallow. His skin felt clammy. The monitor showed elevated heart rate. Brenda was nowhere in sight. I found her in the break room, scrolling through her phone while eating a sandwich. My father is in respiratory distress. Where have you been? I checked him 20 minutes ago. He was fine. He's not fine now. Come immediately. Brenda followed me reluctantly. When she saw Dad's condition, something shifted in her expression. She called for the respiratory therapist and increased his oxygen flow. The crisis was managed within minutes, but the incident proved what I'd suspected. Brenda wasn't monitoring patients as closely as protocol required. I went directly to Vincent Shaw's office without an appointment. We need to talk about Brenda Winters, now. Vincent looked annoyed by the interruption. Dr. Cole, we've discussed this. My father went into respiratory distress while Brenda was on break. She hadn't checked him in 40 minutes despite being responsible for monitoring him every 2 hours. Did you document the exact timeline? I have it right here. I showed him my phone with time-stamped photos and notes. Vincent studied my documentation, his expression gradually changing from dismissive to concerned. I'll speak with Brenda and review her protocols, he said finally. That's not enough. I want her removed from my father's care immediately. I can reassign her to different patients, but I can't suspend an employee without proper investigation. Brenda was reassigned the next day. Dad's new nurse, a competent young man named Oliver Hayes, was everything Brenda wasn't. Attentive, thorough, communicative. Within 48 hours under Oliver's care, Dad showed noticeable improvement. I thought the crisis had passed. I was wrong. 2 weeks after Dad's initial stroke, I received a call from Dr. Wallace Kumar, the emergency physician who'd first treated Dad. Adrian, I need to discuss something confidential. Can you come to my office? I arrived within the hour. Wallace looked uncomfortable as he gestured for me to sit. I've been reviewing cases from the past 6 months. Your complaint about Brenda Winters prompted me to look more carefully at outcomes for her patients. And there's a pattern. Patients under her primary care have statistically worse outcomes, longer ICU stays, more complications, slower recovery times. The difference isn't dramatic enough to trigger automatic review, but it's there when you analyze the data. My stomach tightened. How many patients are we talking about? Over the past year, approximately 80 patients had Brenda as their primary ICU nurse. Of those, 12 experienced significant complications or unexpected declines. That's 15% compared to 7% for other nurses in the same unit. That's double the complication rate. Wallace nodded grimly. I've reported this to hospital administration. There's going to be a formal investigation, but these things move slowly. I wanted you to know because your documentation might be crucial evidence. I spent that evening organizing everything I'd collected. My detailed logs, time-stamped photographs, notes from conversations, copies of official charts showing documentation gaps. I created a comprehensive file that told a clear story of negligent care. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from a woman who identified herself as Inspector Lydia Hartman from the State Healthcare Quality Board. Dr. Cole, I'm conducting a surprise inspection at Clearwater Medical Center today. Your complaint about nursing care triggered our review. I'd like to interview you this afternoon if possible. Absolutely. When and where? 2 o'clock at the hospital. Bring any documentation you've compiled. I arrived at Clearwater early, my file folder thick with evidence. Lydia met me in a private conference room, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with the bearing of someone who'd seen every trick in the medical facility playbook. Tell me everything, she said, opening her laptop. I walked her through the entire timeline. Dad's stroke, Brenda's assignment, The documentation irregularities, the medication delays, the respiratory crisis, Vincent Shaw's dismissive responses, Dr. Kumar's statistical analysis. Lydia took notes rapidly. You've been thorough. Most families wouldn't catch these issues or know how to document them properly. I'm a surgeon. I understand medical protocols and documentation standards. That might be what saves your father's life, Lydia said seriously. And what finally exposes a problem that should have been caught years ago. Lydia spent the rest of the afternoon conducting her inspection. She reviewed patient charts, interviewed staff members, examined documentation protocols, and observed nursing procedures. I wasn't present for most of this, but Pamela Foster, the young nurse who'd shown sympathy during my confrontation with Brenda, found me in the cafeteria around 5 o'clock. Dr. Cole, can we talk privately? We moved to an empty corner. Pamela looked nervous but determined. I've wanted to report Brenda for months. She cuts corners constantly. She falsifies documentation, delays medications when she's busy, and bullies newer nurses who question her methods. Why didn't you report her? I tried once. Vincent Shaw told me I was inexperienced and didn't understand that senior nurses have different workflows. He made me feel like I was the problem. After that, I stayed quiet because I need this job. But you're willing to talk now? The inspector interviewed me. Once I started answering her questions honestly, everything came out. I told her about other patients I've seen Brenda neglect. I gave her specific dates and examples. Thank you for your courage. Pamela's eyes filled with tears. I should have been courageous months ago. Maybe other patients wouldn't have suffered if I'd spoken up sooner. I squeezed her shoulder gently. You're speaking up now. That's what matters. After Pamela left, I sat alone in the cafeteria thinking about systems that protect bad employees while silencing good ones who try to expose problems. The inspection continued the following day. Lydia requested specific patient files, including cases Wallace had identified as having unusual complications under Brenda's care. She interviewed multiple nurses, reviewed policies and procedures, and examined Vincent Shaw's handling of complaints. On Thursday afternoon, Lydia called me into the conference room again. Her expression was grave. Dr. Cole, what I've found is worse than your initial complaint suggested. Brenda Winters has been systematically cutting corners for at least 2 years. She falsifies documentation regularly, routinely delays medications to manage her workload, and has created a culture of fear that prevents other nurses from reporting issues. What about Vincent Shaw? He's been protecting her. Whether through incompetence or deliberate cover-up remains unclear, but he ignored multiple red flags and dismissed legitimate complaints from both families and staff. What happens now? Lydia closed her laptop with finality. Brenda Winters is being suspended immediately pending termination. Vincent Shaw is being placed on administrative leave. The hospital will conduct a comprehensive review of all patients under Brenda's care for the past 2 years, and you need to prepare for the possibility of criminal charges. Criminal? Falsifying medical records is fraud. If her negligence directly contributed to patient deaths, that's potentially criminally negligent homicide. The district attorney will review my findings. I sat back, overwhelmed by the scope of what my simple complaint had uncovered. News of the investigation spread quickly through the hospital. By Friday morning, Clearwater Medical Center issued a statement acknowledging the state inspection and promising full cooperation. Multiple families contacted me after seeing news reports. Each had stories about loved ones who'd experienced unexplained complications or declines while under Brenda's care. None had possessed the medical knowledge to recognize what was happening or the documentation skills to prove it. A man named Gregory Walsh called me in tears. My wife died in that ICU 6 months ago. They said it was complications from pneumonia, but she was improving before Brenda's shift. Then suddenly she crashed. I couldn't understand what went wrong. I'm so sorry for your loss. I want to know if that nurse killed my wife through negligence. Can you help me get answers? I gave him Lydia's contact information and encouraged him to request his wife's complete medical records. Similar calls came throughout the day. A daughter whose father developed sepsis after a routine surgery. A son whose mother's post-operative recovery was complicated by medication errors. A husband whose wife's diabetes management deteriorated inexplicably, during her hospital stay. Each story added another piece to the puzzle of systematic negligence that had gone unnoticed or unreported for years. By weekend's end, 17 families had contacted Inspector Hartman requesting investigations into their loved ones' cases. Dad continued improving under Oliver's attentive care. By the third week after his stroke, he'd regained some movement in his left arm and his speech was slowly returning. The neurologist was finally optimistic. "The progress is encouraging," Dr. Ramirez said during rounds. "With intensive rehabilitation, he should recover significant function." I felt cautiously relieved. Dad wasn't out of danger completely, but the trajectory was finally positive. That same week, I received a call from a lawyer named Victoria Kane. I'd heard her name. She specialized in medical malpractice and had a reputation for aggressive advocacy. "Dr. Cole, I'm representing several families affected by Brenda Winter's negligence. I'd like to discuss your father's case and your documentation." We met in her office downtown. Victoria was in her 40s, sharp-featured, with eyes that missed nothing. "What you've compiled is extraordinary," she said, reviewing my files. "Most families don't have the expertise or persistence to document care failures this thoroughly." "I'm a doctor. I understand what proper care looks like." "Exactly. Your documentation provides the foundation for civil cases against Brenda Winters and Clearwater Medical Center. But it also might support criminal prosecution." Criminal charges against Brenda, and potentially against Vincent Shaw. He received multiple complaints about Brenda's care and failed to investigate properly. That's not just administrative failure. It's criminal negligence if patients died as a result. Victoria pulled up files on her computer. "I've been contacted by 19 families so far. 4 patients died under circumstances that now appear suspicious. 8 suffered serious complications that prolonged their hospital stays or caused permanent harm. 7 others, like your father, experienced slower recovery than expected." The scope was staggering. The investigation expanded rapidly over the following weeks. The State Healthcare Quality Board brought in additional inspectors. The district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation. Clearwater Medical Center hired an independent firm to conduct an internal review. Media coverage intensified. Local news stations ran stories about the nursing scandal. National healthcare publications picked up the story as an example of systematic failures in hospital oversight. I gave several interviews, carefully explaining how I'd recognized the warning signs and why documentation was crucial. "Most families trust that hospitals provide quality care," I told one reporter. "They don't know what questions to ask or what warning signs to watch for. That trust is exploited when bad employees are protected instead of held accountable." The hospital attempted damage control. A new ICU director was appointed. Enhanced monitoring protocols were implemented. Staff received additional training on documentation standards and reporting procedures. But the damage to Clearwater's reputation was severe. Several doctors requested transfers to other facilities. Patients avoided the hospital when possible, choosing to travel farther for care they trusted. Dad was transferred to Memorial Hospital for continued rehabilitation. The move went smoothly, and he thrived under the care of nurses I knew and trusted. "I'm sorry I didn't insist on this from the beginning," I told him during one visit. Dad squeezed my hand, his left hand, which had been paralyzed weeks earlier. "You saved my life. That's what matters." 3 months after my initial complaint, the findings were released publicly. The independent investigation confirmed that Brenda Winters had systematically falsified documentation, delayed medications, and provided substandard care to hundreds of patients over a 2-year period. 5 patient deaths were directly attributed to her negligence. Dozens more had suffered complications that prolonged recovery or caused lasting harm. Vincent Shaw's failure to investigate complaints was documented extensively. Emails showed he'd been warned about Brenda's care quality multiple times by various nurses and at least 2 families. He dismissed each concern without proper investigation. Criminal charges were filed against both Brenda and Vincent. Brenda faced 5 counts of criminally negligent homicide, plus multiple counts of fraud for falsifying medical records. Vincent faced charges of criminally negligent operation of medical facility and obstruction of justice. The civil lawsuits consolidated into a class action representing 43 families. The claims totaled over $80 million. Victoria kept me updated on the legal proceedings. Your documentation is the keystone evidence. Without it, this would have been much harder to prove. Brenda's defense attorneys tried to argue that complications were unavoidable medical outcomes, but your detailed logs comparing her care to other nurses' care demolished that argument. When does the criminal trial start? 6 months, probably. These cases take time to prepare, but the evidence is overwhelming. I expect plea deals rather than trial. Victoria was partially right. Vincent Shaw accepted a plea deal 4 months later, agreeing to testify against Brenda in exchange for reduced charges. He pleaded guilty to criminally negligent operation of medical facility and received 3 years in prison plus permanent revocation of his medical facility management licenses. Brenda refused to accept any deal. She insisted she'd done nothing wrong, that families and investigators were scapegoating her for unavoidable medical complications. Her trial began on a cold January morning, nearly 9 months after Dad's stroke. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with other affected families. The prosecution presented devastating evidence. They played video testimony from Pamela Foster and 6 other nurses describing Brenda's corner-cutting and intimidation tactics. They showed side-by-side comparisons of patient outcomes under Brenda's care versus other ICU nurses. Medical experts testified about the consequences of delayed medications and inadequate monitoring. They explained how falsified documentation prevented physicians from making informed treatment decisions. But the most powerful evidence was my documentation. The prosecution projected my detailed logs on courtroom screens, showing the clear correlation between Brenda's shifts and Dad's declining condition. Dr. Cole's training and persistence gave us an unprecedented window into negligent care, the prosecutor explained to the jury. Without his documentation, we'd have only Nurse Winter's falsified records to rely on. His logs prove that what she documented wasn't what actually occurred. The defense tried to attack my credibility. They argued I was an overbearing family member who'd misinterpreted normal care variations as negligence. They suggested my emotional involvement clouded my professional judgment. When I testified, the defense attorney questioned me aggressively. "Dr. Cole, isn't it true that you were emotional and stressed about your father's condition?" Of course I was emotional. He's my father. And might that emotion have caused you to be hypercritical of routine nursing care? No, my training and experience allowed me to recognize substandard care regardless of my emotional state. But you're not a nurse. You don't understand nursing workflows and pressures. I'm a surgeon who works closely with ICU nurses daily. I understand exactly what quality nursing care looks like. Brenda Winters didn't provide it. The defense attorney tried various angles, but my documentation spoke for itself. Every delay, every falsified note, every ignored protocol was recorded with medical precision and timestamps. The prosecution also called family members of patients who died. An elderly woman testified about her husband's death. He was getting better. The doctor said he'd recover. Then Nurse Winters had him for 2 shifts and suddenly he was gone. I never understood what happened until Dr. Cole's complaint revealed the truth. Another woman described her mother's suffering. She kept telling me something was wrong, that the nurse wasn't giving her medicine on time. I thought she was confused from her illness. Now I know she was right, and I didn't believe her. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On a Friday afternoon, they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts: 5 counts of criminally negligent homicide, 18 counts of fraud for falsifying medical records, and multiple counts of reckless endangerment. Brenda showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. Her attorney immediately announced plans to appeal. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge listened to victim impact statements from 15 families. Each described how Brenda's negligence had stolen their loved ones or caused lasting harm. When my turn came, I spoke not about Dad, but about the systemic failures that had allowed Brenda to harm so many. This wasn't one nurse making isolated mistakes. This was systematic negligence, enabled by administrative protection. Brenda Winters cut corners for years and Vincent Shaw ignored every warning sign because investigating was inconvenient. The real lesson here is that healthcare systems must prioritize patient safety over employee protection. The judge sentenced Brenda to 25 years in prison, noting that her complete lack of remorse and continued insistence that she'd done nothing wrong demonstrated she remained a danger to vulnerable patients. Vincent Shaw, already serving his 3-year sentence, was ordered to pay restitution to affected families. Clearwater Medical Center settled the civil lawsuit for $93 million, rather than face trial. The settlement included requirements for enhanced oversight, mandatory reporting systems, and independent audits of patient outcomes. 6 months after the trial, I was invited to speak at a national conference on patient safety. The auditorium was filled with hospital administrators, nurses, physicians, and patient advocates. I told Dad's story from beginning to end, emphasizing the warning signs I'd recognized and the importance of trusting instincts when something felt wrong. Healthcare systems often treat family concerns as inconvenient interference, I said. But families know their loved ones best. When they say something's wrong, we should listen first and investigate thoroughly before dismissing their concerns. I explained the documentation process I'd used: detailed logs, time-stamped photographs, careful comparison of actual care to documented care. Most families don't have medical training, but anyone can document what they observe. Write down times, take photos of monitors, save every piece of paper. If something goes wrong, that documentation might be the only proof you have. The response was overwhelming. After my presentation, dozens of people approached with their own stories of suspected neglect or systematic care failures. Several hospital administrators thanked me for highlighting issues they'd struggled to address in their own facilities. A patient advocacy organization asked permission to use my documentation methods in a training guide for families with hospitalized loved ones. "What you did should be standard practice," the organization's director told me. "Every family should know how to recognize quality care and document concerns when care falls short." Dad completed his rehabilitation and regained about 70% of his pre-stroke function. He could walk with a cane, his speech was mostly clear, and he'd returned to many of his favorite activities, including reading and woodworking. "I'm one of the lucky ones," he said during a family dinner celebrating his progress. "If you hadn't recognized what was happening and documented everything, I might have been one of the patients who didn't survive Brenda's negligence." The thought still haunted me. How many patients had I been unable to save by exposing Brenda? How many had suffered or died before I filed my complaint? Victoria Kane had identified 5 deaths directly attributable to Brenda's care. But the investigation couldn't fully assess every patient she'd treated over her 12-year career. "You can't save everyone retroactively," Dad said when I shared these thoughts, "but you saved future patients by stopping her. That matters." He was right. But the knowledge that systematic negligence had continued for years because good people stayed silent or were silenced weighed heavily. Pamela Foster had become an advocate for nursing reform. She testified before the state legislature about the culture of fear in some hospitals that prevented nurses from reporting concerns about colleagues. "We need whistleblower protections," she told lawmakers. Junior nurses who report senior nurses' negligence are often retaliated against through scheduling changes, poor evaluations, or termination. Until we protect people who speak up, problems will continue to hide in plain sight. A year after Dad's stroke, the state legislature passed the Healthcare Whistleblower Protection Act. The law provided robust protections for medical staff who reported negligence, abuse, or systematic care failures. It also mandated anonymous reporting systems and independent investigation of all complaints. The law was nicknamed Adrian's Law in media coverage, though I'd never sought that recognition. Dad attended the signing ceremony with me. The governor praised our story as an example of persistence in the face of institutional resistance. Dr. Cole trusted his instincts and documented what he observed, despite being dismissed by hospital administrators, the governor said. His actions saved his father's life and exposed systematic failures that had gone unaddressed for years. This law ensures that other families won't have to fight so hard for accountability. After the ceremony, a reporter asked what I hoped the law would accomplish. I hope it makes healthcare systems uncomfortable about protecting bad employees, I replied. I hope it empowers good employees to report problems without fear of retaliation. And I hope it prevents other families from experiencing what mine did. Clearwater Medical Center had undergone dramatic transformation under new leadership. The entire administrative team was replaced. New oversight systems were implemented. Patient outcome data was reviewed monthly by independent auditors. Pamela Foster was promoted to Quality Improvement Coordinator, tasked with ensuring that nursing concerns were heard and investigated promptly. The culture has changed completely, she told me during a chance meeting at a medical conference. Staff feel safe reporting issues now. Problems are addressed immediately instead of buried. 2 years after the investigation began, I published a medical journal article titled, "When Clinicians Become Patients' Families, Recognizing and Documenting Substandard Care." The article detailed my experience and provided guidance for both medical professionals and laypeople on identifying care quality issues. The article was widely cited and incorporated into patient advocacy training programs across the country. I also developed a smartphone app called CareWatch that helped families document hospital care systematically. The app prompted users to record vital signs, medication times, staff interactions, and other relevant observations. It organized information chronologically and could generate reports for investigators or attorneys. The app was downloaded over 200,000 times in its first year. Families used it to document care at hospitals, nursing homes, rehabilitation facilities, and home health agencies. "You've given families a tool to protect their loved ones," Victoria told me when we met for coffee. That's a remarkable legacy. But the real legacy, I hoped, was cultural change in healthcare systems. Institutions needed to prioritize accountability over comfort, patient safety over employee protection, and transparency over institutional reputation. Several medical schools incorporated patient advocacy and documentation into their curricula, teaching future physicians to recognize systematic care failures and support families who raised concerns. Nursing schools used the Brenda Winters case as an example of how individual negligence combined with administrative failure could create catastrophic outcomes. 3 years after Dad's stroke, I received an unexpected letter. It was from a woman named Elizabeth Torres, whose mother had been one of Brenda's patients. "My mother died while under Nurse Winters' care," Elizabeth wrote. "For 2 years, I blamed myself for not being there, for not asking enough questions, for not noticing what was happening. Your investigation gave me answers and helped me understand that her death wasn't my fault. I want to thank you for giving families like mine closure and justice." The letter reminded me why documentation and advocacy mattered. Families deserved truth, even when that truth was painful. They deserved accountability from systems that had failed their loved ones. I framed Elizabeth's letter and hung it in my office, a reminder of why I'd fought so hard against dismissive administrators and protective systems. Dad, now 80 years old and managing well despite lingering effects from his stroke, had become an advocate himself. He spoke at senior centers about recognizing quality care and trusting instincts when something felt wrong. "Don't let anyone tell you that you're being difficult or emotional when you raise concerns about care," he told audiences. "Healthcare systems depend on families accepting whatever they're told. Challenge that, ask questions, demand answers, document everything." His presentations were always well attended, filled with seniors and their adult children who understood the vulnerability of depending on healthcare systems that didn't always prioritize patient well-being. 5 years after the investigation began, Clearwater Medical Center held a ceremony dedicating their new patient safety center. The facility housed staff training programs, quality improvement initiatives, and resources for families navigating complex medical situations. I was invited to speak at the dedication. Standing before hospital staff, administrators, and community members, I reflected on how far we'd come. 5 years ago, I was a desperate son trying to protect my father from negligent care. The system fought me at every step. Administrators dismissed my concerns. An ICU director protected a bad employee. I was treated as an emotional family member rather than a trained physician with legitimate observations. But I had advantages most families don't have. I had medical training to recognize substandard care. I had documentation skills to prove what was happening. I had professional credibility that eventually forced people to listen. Most families don't have those advantages. They depend entirely on systems operating in good faith. When systems fail, vulnerable patients suffer, and families are left with grief and unanswered questions. This Patient Safety Center represents Clearwater's commitment to never again prioritize employee protection over patient safety, administrative convenience over accountability, or institutional reputation over truth. I hope every healthcare facility in this country will follow Clearwater's example. I hope they'll implement robust reporting systems, investigate all complaints thoroughly, and protect employees who speak up about problems. My father survived because I refused to accept dismissive responses. Other families weren't so fortunate. We honor those who suffered or died by ensuring their experiences drive lasting change. The audience stood in applause. Dad, sitting in the front row, smiled with tears in his eyes. After the ceremony, Pamela Foster approached me. "Thank you for believing me when I finally found courage to speak up. Thank you for showing that one person with documentation and determination can change an entire system." "Thank you for your courage," I replied. Without voices from inside the system confirming what I observed, the investigation might have stalled. Walking to my car after the ceremony, I thought about the journey from that first phone call about Dad's small incident to this moment of institutional transformation. The nurse had cut corners with my father's treatment, confident that her experience and administrative protection made her untouchable. But her confidence collapsed when Inspector Hartman checked my file and found undeniable proof of systematic negligence. Documentation defeated denial. Persistence defeated protection. Truth defeated institutional comfort. And somewhere, families who'd lost loved ones to preventable negligence finally had answers, accountability, and perhaps some measure of peace. Dad was waiting in my car, ready to go home. As I drove away from Clearwater Medical Center, he reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for saving my life," he said simply. "Thank you for trusting me when I told you to let me document everything," I replied. We drove in comfortable silence, two people who'd faced systematic failure together and emerged victorious. The battle had been exhausting, but the outcome was worth every difficult moment. Justice had been served. Systems had been reformed, and vulnerable patients had stronger protections because one family refused to accept negligent care. The recordings and documentation that started everything remained stored safely, a permanent record of what happens when healthcare systems prioritize protection over accountability and what happens when someone finally says enough.